I need you to stay in your lane, Elizabeth. That's what Grant, the new VP of sales, full-time windbag and part-time narcissist, hissed at me in the elevator, just 4 days after his smug mug showed up on the org chart. We weren't even halfway to the 12th floor. I was holding a draft risk memo in one hand, a lukewarm coffee in the other, and fighting the urge to pour the latter directly onto his overpriced loafers. That was the moment I knew. I wasn't just being sidelined, I was being erased. Let me back up before I torch the punchline. For 6 years, I'd been the invisible scaffolding behind every signed contract, every clean audit, every smooth government renewal our execs like to take credit for. You know those deals that don't implode? Yeah. That's because someone like me quietly bled behind the scenes, translating gobbledygook into clean compliance lines and scrubbing red flags like a legal janitor. Procurement knew me. Legal trusted me. Clients sent Christmas cards. But upstairs, I was ops. Meaning, underpaid, overlooked, and seated too far from the windows to matter. And I was fine with that, or I had been. Until Grant parachuted in like a human LinkedIn post. All buzzwords and backslaps, zero substance. Kind of guy who ends every sentence with a smirk and a sideways glance, like he just sold you a bridge you already own. Within 2 weeks, he'd restructured 3 teams, shuffled budget lines like he was playing blackjack with someone else's chips, and started holding court with the CEO like they were frat brothers, reconnecting over IPA flights. My name disappeared from client briefings. Deal review meetings got moved without me. Suddenly, I was being asked to circulate updates, not lead discussions. Classic move: isolate the woman who knows too much, then hand her work to someone who knows jack squat and calls it strategy. And I know what some of y'all might be thinking: why not just say something? Oh, I did, to HR, to legal, to my own mirror. Got the same response every time: a tight-lipped smile and a reminder that leadership's vision must be supported. Apparently, my vision of not committing federal compliance violations wasn't on brand for this quarter. Now, before I go full scorched earth, real quick, if you're listening and nodding because your own office just hired a Grant with great teeth and zero brains, do me one solid. Tap that like button and hit subscribe. It takes you 2 seconds, and it really keeps this team running behind the scenes, like the Elizabeths of the world trying to keep the roof from collapsing. All right, back to the regularly scheduled implosion. The federal deal we were working on, it wasn't just big, it was career-defining. An $80 million, 5-year tech modernization program with a major federal agency. One of those rare unicorns that floats in on a compliance cloud and requires flawless documentation, ethical hygiene, and vendor history cleaner than a surgeon's scalpel. Guess who'd been building the bones of that proposal for 8 months? Yep, me. Guess who got trotted out for one introductory call, then immediately benched like a second-string punter? Also me. Because Grant, who once asked me, what's the difference between an RFP and an NDA? Like it was a trick question, decided he could fast-track the relationship. Said his friendlier tone was what the agency needed. I told him the agency's ethics officer doesn't give a damn about tone. He told me I was out of sync with the sales culture. Next day, he held a Zoom call with the agency's procurement lead, without me, without the documentation, without the mandatory compliance clauses reviewed. Just vibes and a 5-slide deck that looked like it was made in Microsoft Paint. The fallout was immediate. The agency went silent. Our internal Slack channels blew up. The CEO pinged me with a 3-word message: "What happened here?" And I'll be honest, part of me wanted to scream. Another part just stared at the screen, let the rage bloom behind my ribs, and typed out the cleanest answer I could. Protocol wasn't followed. What I didn't say, what I couldn't say yet, was that this wasn't just a blown call. This was the start of something. Because when a man like Grant corners you in a meeting, folds his arms, and dares you to prove your worth in front of a room full of bootlickers, you can either shrink or sharpen your knives. I've never been much of a shrinking type. The call was scheduled for 10:30 a.m. sharp. I wasn't invited. Instead, I sat in the overflow conference room with a cold cup of vending machine coffee and a printout of the compliance deck I'd spent 2 months stitching together like a forensic quilt. Grant had swaggered past my desk that morning with his Bluetooth earpiece jammed in, snapping his fingers at no one and saying, "Don't worry, Liz. I'll sell the vision." Sell the vision. It was a federal procurement contract, not a text talk. You don't sell vision to a government agency. You align deliverables, reference legacy frameworks, and adhere to every syllable of regulatory guidance like your life depends on it. Because sometimes it actually does. 10 minutes after his call ended, my phone buzzed. It was Caitlin from our contracts team. Liz, what did he just tell them about our licensing model? My stomach dropped. I don't know. I wasn't in the room. She exhaled like she'd just been gut punched. He said we own the platform outright, that it's proprietary. He what? I nearly knocked my coffee over. That's not just wrong. That's disqualifying. Because here's the kicker. The agency's vendor eligibility is built around shared source infrastructure. We're licensed through a federal reseller agreement. We don't own the core platform. Misrepresenting that isn't just a whoopsie. It's a violation that could blacklist us from future bids. Caitlin was quiet. Then they ended the call early. I didn't wait. I opened the internal CRM and saw the contact record had been updated, on hold pending eligibility clarification. The agency ghosted us for the next 3 days. Emails, no replies. Callbacks, radio silence. Our internal client rep, usually chatty, marked himself OOO indefinitely. By Friday, CEO's assistant forwarded a calendar invite. Executive review. Federal deal 4 p.m., mandatory. When I walked into that boardroom, the air was heavy with unsaid things. Grant sat at the head of the table, arms crossed, sipping from a metallic water bottle like he was prepping for CrossFit class instead of an inquisition. The CEO didn't even wait for everyone to sit. I want to know how we ended up on the federal timeout list, he said, eyes on me. Grant, me? I wasn't part of the call, I said flat. But you own compliance for the deal? Yes. And I submitted the correct licensing disclosure 2 weeks ago. I paused, it wasn't used. Grant jumped in faux casual. I simplified the language. Procurement folks don't want to drown in legalese, right? The CEO nodded slowly. Well, now we're drowning in silence. Elizabeth, fix it, quietly. I want it back on track. I blinked. That was it. A reprimand for Grant. No accountability. Just another woman in another office being told to clean up a mess she didn't make, while the guy with the jawline and the golf handshake moved on to his next demolition site. On the elevator ride down, Grant had the gall to smirk at me. They like a confident pitch, he said. Maybe next time you don't ghost the meeting. I wasn't invited, I said. He winked. Then maybe advocate harder. I stood there, staring at my reflection in the elevator panel, blurry, half-lit, and vibrating with restrained rage. My face didn't move, but something inside me cracked. A little splinter in the dam. Not a flood, not yet, but soon, because now I saw the pattern. I was going to be the scapegoat. He'd already written the script. Grant's deal, Grant's initiative. And when it blew up, Elizabeth didn't support leadership. Elizabeth didn't deliver, and I knew how these stories end. Women like me don't get credit. We get clearance badges deactivated while sipping our lunch at our desks. But not this time. No. This time, I was going to rewrite the damn ending. It was 7:12 p.m. on a Tuesday, and the only light left in the building was that creepy flicker from the motion sensor fluorescents in the east hallway, the kind that hum like a mosquito and die when you look directly at them. Grant summoned me to conference room B with the tone of a man who thought he was about to deliver a TED-worthy monologue. He sat there already, feet up on the table, tie loosened, sipping flat La Croix like he was CEO of mediocrity. You wanted to talk about the federal account, he said, not looking up from his phone. I shut the door behind me. It's off track, and the agency has gone dark because of your misstatement. We need to clarify immediately. We need to do it in writing. Grant chuckled like I'd just told a joke about my own incompetence. Relax, Liz, they just need time to process the vision. It's not a vision, Grant. It's a federal procurement contract. You misrepresented the licensing. They're not ignoring us, they're quarantining us. That got him. He sat forward slowly, eyes narrow. You've got nerve blaming me. I've got facts, I shot back. He stood up, too close, breath reeking of breath mints and ego. All right, he said, voice dropping. You think you can do better? You want the deal? Then close it without me. Go ahead, walk out. Let's see what you've got. I didn't flinch. Just held his stare for one long beat, then turned and walked out of that room. No door slam. No dramatic exit line. Just the sound of my heels on laminate, my pulse in my ears, and the distinct realization that I wasn't afraid of him anymore, 'cause something about the way he smirked, like I was a harmless little intern who dared to raise her voice, lit a fuse inside me that had been burning in secret for too damn long. I went home, poured myself a glass of Cabernet I couldn't taste, and pulled out the agency's procurement policy binder like it was a holy text. I'd read it a dozen times before, but that night, I read it like a hunter. I wasn't looking for a fix. I was looking for a loophole. By midnight, my coffee had gone cold, and I had something better than a loophole. I had a live wire. There it was. Section 11, paragraph 6.3, buried in legal mulch. Named representatives subject to prior federal ethics censure, suspension, or conflict of interest sanctions are not eligible to participate in active procurement negotiations, nor may their signatures validate contractual agreements without written federal override. My heart kicked once, hard, and settled into a new rhythm. Because suddenly, I remembered a conversation from 8 months back with our former director of compliance. He'd been half laughing, half whispering about some idiot exec who'd been slapped with a quiet ethics censure for fraternization during a DoD software pilot. Couldn't touch federal contracts for 5 years. I hadn't known the name then, but I sure as hell looked it up now. I dug through my old emails, the forgotten SharePoint folder labeled Compliance Archives HR Notes, the kind of place no one ever checks unless they've been burned before. And there it was. A scanned PDF from a third-party legal screener, time-stamped during Grant's onboarding process. Subject, Grant D. Ursa red flag noted details. Previously sanctioned by Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs. OFP, 2020 conflict of interest violation, non-eligible for primary engagement in federal contract execution through 2025 without override. He'd signed a disclosure acknowledging it, which meant his signature could nullify the entire deal. And I realized, right then, he hadn't just botched the call. He'd never been eligible to take it in the first place. I leaned back in my chair, the world spinning slightly. He dared me to walk out and do it without him. What he couldn't know, was that by issuing that challenge, he'd handed me the match. The next steps wouldn't be loud. They'd be surgical. Because if Grant wanted to play king, he should have learned the rules of the game. And I had just found the one clause that could burn his little empire to the ground. Next morning, I didn't clock in, I infiltrated. I moved like someone who could still be fired, but not forgotten. My steps were quiet, my face unreadable, but inside, I was no longer bracing for impact, I was aiming. By 9:05 a.m., I was in the unused project war room on the 11th floor, the one Grant never bothered to get the keycard for. I logged into the compliance VPN, ran the agency directory, dialed the number I'd highlighted in red Sharpie the night before. 3 rings, a click, then a dry, deliberate voice. "This is Jeremy Finch, Office of Ethics and Procurement Integrity." I identified myself, clearly, calmly, the way you do when you're standing on the edge of a cliff, but you've triple-checked your parachute. I told him I was the risk officer for the proposal in question, and had reviewed eligibility concerns related to a prior OFP sanction involving one of our listed representatives, Grant Mercer. There was a pause, followed by the soft rattle of a keyboard. Then, "His name is on our restricted list until May of next year." I didn't say anything. Mr. Finch continued. "Is he still the primary liaison?" "Not anymore," I said, effective this call. Another pause, the first sign of life in his tone, a hint of relief, like he'd been waiting for someone to say it. "All right then. If you're leading the renegotiation, we can proceed. But everything must be compliant and clean from this point forward." "I understand," I replied. And just like that, the deal wasn't dead. It had a pulse, a new identity, mine. Over the next few days, I became 2 versions of myself. Outwardly, I played the same quiet Elizabeth, the background operator, the woman who took meeting notes and fetched version histories like a glorified office librarian. Grant didn't even notice I'd gone silent. He was too busy doing visibility lunches with the CEO and polishing his LinkedIn endorsements. But in private, I was something else entirely. I rewrote the scope of work to reflect the agency's preferred shared ownership model, stripped every vague bullet point Grant had shoehorned into the first draft, and replaced them with crystal-clear timelines, federal clause citations, and naming conventions that made our compliance team cry tears of joy. And I didn't send it through our internal legal pipeline. I wasn't about to trust the same people who'd nodded along when Grant asked if GSA stood for General Software Agreement. Instead, I made a quiet call to a woman named Felicia Tran, federal contract attorney I met at a DC summit 2 years ago. One of the few people I trusted with a truth this nuclear. Felicia listened, didn't interrupt, and then simply said, "If you're going to do this, Elizabeth, make sure you finish it. Don't start unless you plan to own the signature block." I already had. She walked me through the contract hygiene checklist, Every signature needed to be time-stamped and traceable. Every attachment had to include clause appendices and rollback controls. She even offered to quietly notarize the addendum that confirmed I had board-delegated authority. Because, fun fact, 6 months ago, when the previous compliance director retired, the board, too lazy to recruit, had added a 1-year temporary clause naming me as interim signatory for compliance-led negotiations, pending permanent hire. They'd buried it in a PDF. I hadn't. Now that clause was about to become the fuse. Every night, I backed up my versions to a secure drive with a file name no one would ever think to check: Q3 Budget Reforecast V7 Final. By day, I was still ghosting through meetings, letting Grant talk over me while he pitched return on vision and client-forward paradigms like he was auditioning for a TED talk no one wanted. But by night, I was orchestrating a federal contract that would redefine who this company actually worked for, and not one person upstairs saw it coming, because the best revolutions don't start with explosions. They start with a phone call, a clause, and a woman who's had just about enough. Grant strutted through the office like he'd already won, kept calling it his deal loud enough for the interns to quote it in the break room. You'd think he was about to ring the NASDAQ bell, not botch a federal contract like a high-stakes karaoke night. Every few hours, he'd swing by my desk with a wink and a finger gun, saying things like, "We're close, Liz. Just need to tie the bow. Tie the bow, buddy, you forgot to wrap the gift, and now the box is full of snakes." But I let him talk, let him bask, because sometimes the best cover is silence. And they'd already written me off as operational noise, a background character in their little hero arc. Perfect? Behind the scenes, I was stitching together something airtight. First stop, procurement. Ashley, one of our procurement analysts, had been quietly watching this clown parade with the same dead-eyed stare I reserve for jury duty. She was sharp, newer, but not green. I caught her in the kitchen, microwaving the saddest lentil soup I've ever seen, and I asked her point blank, "You pull the prior revisions on the master agreement and flag any versions where clause 14.2, vendor liability thresholds, were altered." She blinked once, leaned in, and said, "What's this really about?" I gave her the cliff notes. Her spoon never made it to her mouth. By the end of the day, she'd sent me a cleaned-up version history with a note. Somebody removed the indemnity trigger Grant hated. I found the rollback copy. It's legal gold. Ashley was now quietly on Team Reality. Next, I looped in Troy from IT security. Guy wears headphones so big they could pick up satellite signals, but he knows his stuff and doesn't ask stupid questions. I told him we needed to ensure end-to-end encryption on the revised submission, no internal visibility until we had third-party confirmation. Troy looked up from his keyboard, muttered, "They trying to screw this up," enabled a private pipeline tagged under our joint credentials. Meanwhile, Grant was still running victory laps in meetings, bragging that he'd stabilized the federal relationship and that the last mile of legal polish was underway. He said this in front of legal. Legal just stared at their notebooks like they were praying for death. The real moment came Thursday afternoon, when my friend Hannah in finance grabbed me in the hallway. Shared enough bad happy hours and worse pay equity stats to have an unspoken alliance. She whispered, "The board's restless. They want the deal signed before Q3 ends. Chair's been pushing for updates." "How restless?" I asked. "Restless enough to start asking if Grant's more flash than function." That was the green light. I spent the next 48 hours writing what I now consider my Sistine Chapel of compliance clauses. I restored the indemnity trigger in 14.2, quietly tucked beneath a revised escalation framework that required any post-signature amendments to be reviewed by an independent third party, or else trigger automatic fee recalibration in favor of the client. It was buried inside legalese, so thick even our lawyers would need a snorkel to get through it. Then I added one more line, clean and simple, to the execution page. Named signatory: Elizabeth Hart, Acting Compliance Officer per Board Resolution 7.4. A. Just beneath that, a clause with bite: removal or reassignment of named signatory within 90 days of execution shall trigger immediate reevaluation of contract integrity, including indemnity review and audit eligibility per Section 18. It was elegant, invisible to the untrained eye, but devastating if mishandled. Like planting a landmine and painting over it with office beige. Grant wouldn't notice. He never read past page 5 of anything unless it had his name in bold. By Sunday night, the deal was polished, Legally bulletproof, ethically clean, technically flawless. All I had to do now was place it, deliver it like a little gift-wrapped grenade. Let Grant keep talking. Let him think it was all still under his thumb, because they all still saw me as the quiet one in the corner, the spreadsheet ghost, the woman who stayed late and didn't rock boats. He had no idea I'd just set the entire ship on fire. Monday, 6:17 a.m. The building was empty, the kind of eerie stillness you only get when even the vending machines haven't booted up yet. I swiped my badge, stepped into the server room, and plugged in the final version from my encrypted drive. No fanfare, no announcements, just a soft, satisfying whir from the printer as it warmed up to birth the most legally explosive document I'd ever touched. Deal was complete, all 87 pages. Clean, bulletproof, signed under my name. At 2:03 a.m., the federal agency's procurement lead, Mr. Alvarez, had responded to my final submission with 6 words: received, reviewed, executed, forwarding to council. Attached was the scanned signature packet, complete with timestamp, federal routing confirmation, and confirmation from the Office of Ethics. The file name, Vised Master Agreement, FY24 Executed Heart PDF. I stared at it for a full minute. Not in awe, not even in relief, just silence. I'd done it. Grant was sleeping in, no doubt dreaming of how he'd spin last week's disaster into a growth opportunity during his next performance review. He had no clue the deal he'd mishandled, misrepresented, and practically set on fire had already risen without him. By 8:30, the office was starting to stir, phones ringing, people half walking while pretending to check Slack. Grant was due in by 9. I went to the printer, pulled the final copy, triple-bound, with gold corner tabs and a black faux-leather cover that made it look like a fancy menu at a restaurant that serves steaks by the ounce. I slid it into a folder. No post-it note, no commentary, just the truth, and I walked to his office. He wasn't there yet. Good. I opened the door, walked past his little Zen sand tray half-raked like his understanding of compliance, and laid the folder dead center on his desk. Then I stood for a moment, let the silence soak in. His chair, still turned slightly from last Friday. His stupid coffee mug that said rise and grind. The whiteboard behind his desk still had close FED deal 2s, scribbled in red like a to-do item. I flipped the folder open, just enough to show the signature page. Right there in sharp black ink. Elizabeth Hart named signatory. I didn't smile. I didn't add a sticky note with a passive-aggressive smiley face. I just whispered it aloud like a confession. Done. Then I added louder this time so the room could keep it, without you. And I walked out, not fast, not slow, just done. No victory lap, no parade. Because this wasn't about revenge, not yet. This was about finishing something they told me I couldn't start, about building the whole goddamn bridge while they argued about what color to paint the welcome sign. Outside, the office buzz was growing. I passed Grant's little posse by the break room. One of them asked if I'd seen the VP's federal update deck. I didn't even blink. I just said, you'll want to check his desk. Then I went back to my cubicle, sat down, opened a fresh file, and for the first time in 6 years, I let myself do nothing. Not hustle, not explain, not clean up someone else's mess. Just be the woman who had already crossed the finish line while everyone else was still lacing their shoes. They didn't know it yet, but the power dynamics had already shifted. The only thing left was watching the fallout land in the right inboxes. I knew something had detonated the moment my phone started vibrating like a seismograph at 7:14 a.m. 3 missed calls from legal. No texts. Just voicemails, urgent, tight-voiced, and so out of character it was almost poetic. Elizabeth, this is Brad and legal. Call me back immediately. Need to discuss a matter regarding federal contract authorization. This is time-sensitive. Please respond. Time-sensitive, my ass. The time had passed, and I was already in the rearview mirror. I was halfway through pouring my coffee when I heard the thundering stomp of Grant's ego heading toward the executive boardroom. Doors slammed. Voices rose. Someone muttered Jesus Christ near the glass fishbowl meeting room. I didn't even bother standing. Just sipped. By 9:00 a.m., the internal Slack channels were lighting up like a Christmas tree in hell. Hash compliance, does anyone know what this new contract is? Just got pinged by procurement, they said we're signed. Board just locked the 10th floor. What the hell is happening? I leaned back in my chair and clicked open my inbox. Right there, thread forwarded from Mr. Alvarez at the agency. Subject, next steps Hart contract execution confirmation. There it was in writing. The client had not only accepted the revised terms, they were relieved. His exact words, Elizabeth Hart's proactive compliance and responsiveness gave us full confidence to proceed. We look forward to working with her team. The kicker, that email had been sent not to me, but to the board chair. Direct. He'd bypassed Grant entirely. That's when the game officially changed. My desktop pinged again, this time from Hannah in finance. Holy SHT, the board's in DEFCON 1. Grant is sweating through his blazer. What did you do? I just typed, my job. Because while Grant was busy having a meltdown behind closed doors, the board was busy asking real questions. Who finalized this? Why wasn't it routed through standard sign-off? Why are our indemnity terms flagged? The most damning of all, who owns the liability now? Because tucked neatly in that contract, inside the updated clause 14.2, hidden beneath 7 layers of dry-as-toast legalese, was a little clause they hadn't seen coming. In the event of the named signatory's termination, reassignment, or removal within 90 days post-execution, the client reserves the right to trigger audit review and breach risk reassessment. The financial liability incurred during such review shall be the responsibility of the approving executive body, including indemnity for client damages. Translation: if they tried to cut me loose now, they paid the price. Not the company, not the shareholders, them. The clause was technically standard language, just not usually this front-loaded, and never this precise. But thanks to Felicia, my off-the-books federal contract consultant, every syllable was bulletproof. Grant had no idea. The board, they were just finding out. I pictured the look on the chair's face as he scrolled through the client's email, then flipped to the signature block that read, Elizabeth Hart named signatory. I imagined the silence in that boardroom as that name landed like a punch to the chest. The room full of men who never looked twice at the woman who made their contracts stick. And now, I was the only thing keeping them out of audit hell. While they argued, while legal tried to unspool what had just happened, while Grant sweated through his overpriced blazer and tried to explain how he let a federal deal close without him, I sat in my cubicle. Still, quiet, not gloating, not yet, but knowing that I hadn't just closed the deal. I'd become the clause that kept the company breathing. The call came in at 11:06 a.m. No caller ID, just the low hum of a secure line. Answered with one word yes, because I already knew who it was. Elizabeth, Felicia said, it's done, there's chatter but nothing actionable. The indemnity clause held, there was a pause on the line. Then, brilliant move, you protected both sides. I didn't smile, not really. Just exhaled through my nose and stared out the office window at the gray sky like it might apologize for everything someday. I wasn't angry anymore, just done, past it. Because while the board scrambled to decode the contract like it was a bomb with blinking lights, I was already 3 steps ahead and 3 months removed emotionally. Let them catch up. Let me rewind the tape for the record. 6 months ago, when our former compliance director resigned mid-quarter, burnt out, gutted by politics, there was a board meeting to discuss interim coverage. Nobody wanted to stall operations. Nobody wanted to pay for a new hire during budgeting season. So they passed a temporary motion. I would serve as acting compliance officer, with full delegation of authority, for contracts not exceeding $100M. Simple, efficient, invisible, and most importantly, recorded in a PDF labeled Board Minutes Q2 to 23 approved final PDF guess, who found it buried on the shared drive in a folder called Archive to be sorted. They forgot about it. I didn't. When I drafted the contract, I cited that document verbatim on the signature page, even linked it in the footer metadata, just to make sure no one could say I forged a damn thing. I had board-backed authority, and I used it. But the board? Oh, they were just now remembering that sleepy Thursday meeting where someone passed around croissants, and they all nodded along to temporary stopgaps. Now they were staring down the barrel of a clause that made them personally liable if they tried to cut me loose to save Grant's reputation. Clause 14.2b wasn't just about indemnity. It was about ownership. It said, if the named signatory was removed post-execution, the client could demand a breach review. And if the review turned up any inconsistencies, the financial responsibility didn't fall to the company as a whole, fell to the approving executive party that altered the contract structure. In other words, remove me and they pay, not in stock dips, not in PR headaches, in cash, personal cash. There was a soft knock at my desk. Ashley from procurement leaned in, whispering like we were in a Cold War thriller. Grant just got pulled into a closed session with legal and the chair. Good, I said. Also, Someone leaked the client's praise email to the board-wide thread. "You're kind of famous." I nodded. "Don't forward it," she smiled. Too late. 10 minutes later, I got a meeting invite. Subject line, board advisory role proposal discussion. I declined. Then I sent a one-line reply, "I'm happy to consult remotely under separate terms," because I wasn't coming back to patch holes in their sinking ship. I'd already handed them the life raft. What they did with it was on them. Back on my screen, Slack was buzzing. People were posting Danny DeVito gifs in the #general channel. Someone changed the office printer's name to Elizabeth Hart Memorial Compliance Enforcer. Cute, but I ignored it all. Instead, I opened a fresh doc. Typed a title, Transition Plan External Oversight Model. I'd already moved on. They were just now realizing they'd pushed me too far, cornered me too long, and forced me to become something I never wanted to be. A name they couldn't erase, clause they couldn't survive without. The emergency board meeting was set for 4:00 p.m. You could feel it in the walls, like the building itself had caught the scent of blood. The top floor conference room was sealed off, blinds drawn like a bunker. Phones were silenced. Assistants were told, no interruptions unless the building's on fire. Inside, the temperature felt 5 degrees hotter than it should have been. Not from the thermostat, but from panic, guilt, the looming scent of imminent accountability. Grant sat at the far end of the table, arms crossed, eyes darting. His once crisp suit now clung to him like regret. His shirt was damp at the collar. The chair of the board sat directly across, fingers steepled, lips pressed into a line so thin it could have cut glass. Outside counsel stood at the head of the room. Calm, precise. A folder in his hand, reading glasses perched low on his nose like this was just another Tuesday, even though everyone else knew this was the reckoning. He opened to a bookmarked page, cleared his throat, and read, "Removal of named signatory within 90 days post-execution shall trigger immediate client audit and breach risk review, with indemnity exposure assigned to any approving executive body responsible for said removal." He paused. Silence. Then, "This clause is valid, legally binding, and enforceable." The room shifted like a slow earthquake. Eyes went to Grant, then to the chair, then to Grant again. The board chair leaned forward, voice low but lethal. "You pushed her into walking. Now fix what you broke." Grant tried to speak. I didn't know she had authority to sign. No one told me the chair raised a hand. "You didn't ask." Legal slid a document across the table. A formal motion. Recommendation, Grant Mercer. Suspension pending review of conduct related to federal contract execution and internal oversight failure. The vote was unanimous. Not a single voice raised in his defense. His badge was deactivated before the ink dried. And me? I wasn't in the room. I was at home, barefoot, sipping coffee out of a chipped mug with my name spelled wrong on it, watching the storm from outside the blast radius. At 4:42 p.m., an email popped into my inbox. Subject, Invitation Strategic Compliance Advisory. The message was short, respectful, groveling, but in a boardroom kind of way. They were offering me the open seat, non-executive, remote, but well-compensated. Oversight on high-value contracts, quarterly advisory rights, autonomy. The kind of offer they should have made 6 years ago. But back then, I was invisible. Now they knew who held the pen. I typed my reply slowly. No drama, no fireworks. "I'm not coming back." Then I added, "But I'll answer your call if the terms are right." I hit send. No smile, no triumph parade, just a quiet exhale. The kind that comes after a long, buried scream finally leaves your chest, because I hadn't just walked. I hadn't just closed the deal. I rewrote the floor plan. And from now on, every door they open will be one I designed. Big thanks, you legends of the old office days. Subscribe to keep the switch-flicking chaos alive. Your ex-boss is shaking in their loafers.